The air felt thick, suffocating. My fingers trembled as I clutched the phone, staring at the screen, willing it to light up, to show his name, to bring me an answer. No messages, no calls, nothing. "Listen, sweetheart." My mother's voice was soft, almost hesitant, but the weight of her words pressed against my chest like a heavy stone. He's probably not coming. You've been waiting for over 3 hours." I shook my head violently, my veil swaying with the motion. No, this wasn't happening. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye. My makeup, once flawless, was now slightly smudged, my eyes red-rimmed from the tears I was desperately trying to hold back. The wedding dress, the one I had spent months choosing, felt like a costume, suffocating me rather than making me feel like a bride. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He will come. He has to." Before my mother could protest, I grabbed my phone and dialed his number for what had to be the 100th time today. Ring, ring, ring. The silence on the other end felt deafening. Every second stretched into an eternity. Then, voicemail. Again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it in disbelief. He wasn't answering, but maybe he was on his way? Maybe he was stuck somewhere. Maybe. I pressed the call button again. This time, it didn't even ring. A notification popped up instead. Call blocked. My breath hitched. The room around me blurred as my vision filled with unshed tears. No, that wasn't possible. He wouldn't. He couldn't. My hands shook as I typed a message, my thumbs flying over the keyboard. "Where are you? What's happening? Please, just tell me something. Anything." I hit send. The message didn't go through. Blocked. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. A strangled sob slipped past my lips. "He blocked me," I choked out. The words felt foreign, unreal. My mother's face paled as she took a hesitant step toward me. "Oh, honey." I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, this wasn't real. This wasn't happening. "Someone must know something," I muttered, suddenly frantic. Maybe something happened to him? Maybe he lost his phone. Maybe he's hurt. I turned to the small crowd of people gathered in the dressing room, bridesmaids, relatives, my closest friends, all watching me with pitying eyes. I hated that look. I refused to believe what they were thinking. I pressed my phone to my ear and called his best friend. "Hello?" "Jake," I gasped, relief flooding me. "Where is he? Have you heard from him?" There was a pause. "I don't know." His voice was tight, uncomfortable, lying. I gritted my teeth. "Jake, please. I just need to know if he's okay. If something happened." "I really don't know," he interrupted, his voice hurried. "Look, I have to go." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. "What did he say?" my mother asked gently. "He lied." My voice was hollow. The walls felt like they were closing in. The wedding hall beyond the dressing room doors was still full, guests whispering, shifting uncomfortably, waiting. They had come to witness love, joy, a promise. Instead, they were watching a disaster unfold in real time. Panic surged inside me like a tidal wave. I turned to one of my bridesmaids. "Check his Instagram, his WhatsApp, his Facebook, anywhere." She nodded quickly, her fingers tapping furiously on her phone. Moments later, she looked up, her face pale. He deleted everything. The air in my lungs vanished. The world around me became muted, a dull hum in the background. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My fiancé, the man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry today, had erased himself, vanished. I clenched my fists. No. There had to be an explanation. He wouldn't just... A notification sound snapped me out of my daze. My cousin had just texted. "He's gone. Left the country this morning. Someone saw him at the airport." I felt the words like a slap. My knees wobbled. My mother reached for me, but I jerked away. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I staggered forward, my dress trailing behind me, feeling heavier with every step. My heart was shattering, breaking apart piece by piece, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I reached the doors to the wedding hall, gripping the handle. The moment I opened them, I would be stepping into the reality of what had just happened. He wasn't late. He wasn't lost. He was gone. And he had left me here, alone. A broken bride at her own wedding. I remember the first time I saw him. It was an ordinary day. Nothing special, nothing unusual. The kind of day that blurs into the background of your life. But then, in an instant, everything changed. I was running late, my hands full of coffee and papers, my mind already miles ahead, thinking about the million things I had to do. And then, I crashed into him. Coffee spilled, papers flew, my heart stopped, and then I looked up. His eyes, deep brown, flecked with gold, met mine. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly amused. "Wow," he said, grinning. "I think you just stole my breath." I had rolled my eyes, muttering an embarrassed apology as I bent down to gather my things. But he had already crouched down, helping me pick up the scattered pages. "Let me make it up to you," he said, handing me my now half-empty coffee cup. "You look like you could use a fresh one." That was how it started. A simple moment, accidental, fleeting, but it changed everything. The weeks that followed were intoxicating. We talked for hours, sometimes about everything, sometimes about nothing. He had a way of making even the most mundane things feel special. A walk in the park became an adventure. A late-night conversation became a secret world only the two of us shared. "I never knew love could feel like this," he had told me once, brushing his fingers against mine as we sat under the dim glow of streetlights. "Like it's something I can actually hold." I had smiled, pressing my forehead against his. "You can," I whispered. "You're holding it right now." He was my best friend, my safe place. He made me laugh until my stomach ached. He knew exactly when I needed silence and when I needed words. He made me believe in forever. And then came the proposal. It was a warm summer night. We had planned a quiet dinner, just the two of us, a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. I didn't suspect a thing. We ate, we laughed, we shared stories we already knew by heart, but something about him felt different that night. There was a nervous energy in the way he looked at me, the way his fingers tapped against his glass. Then, as dessert arrived, he stood up. I blinked, confused. "What are you doing?" I laughed, watching as he stepped beside me. Then, he dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the restaurant. My heart stopped. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a small velvet box. "I used to think love was just something that happened in books," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Something unpredictable, something that slips through your fingers when you least expect it." He looked up at me, eyes full of something raw and real. "But then I met you, and I realized I never want to go another day without you." The box opened. Inside, the ring glimmered under the soft golden lights. Simple, elegant, perfect. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes. My chest ached from how much I loved him in that moment. I didn't even have to think. "Yes," I whispered. Then, louder, "Yes!" The restaurant erupted into applause, but all I could see was him. He slipped the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into his arms. "We're going to have the most beautiful life together," he whispered into my hair. And I believed him. The months leading up to the wedding were the happiest of my life. We planned everything together, every tiny detail. He insisted on being involved in all the decisions. The venue, the flowers, the invitations. "I want it to be perfect," he said one night as we sat on the couch, flipping through wedding magazines. "You deserve the best." I would wake up every morning to little notes he left me. "Can't wait to marry you. Just a few more weeks. Soon, you'll be my wife." We danced in the living room to our wedding song, practicing for our first dance. He stepped on my toes. I laughed. He twirled me anyway. "This is what forever feels like," he murmured, pressing a kiss to my temple. And I believed him. The night before the wedding, he called me. "I love you," he said softly. "Tomorrow is the start of everything." I smiled, my heart full. I love you too, I whispered. See you at the altar. Little did I know I would never see him again. At the time, I never saw it, or maybe I refused to see it. Because when you love someone, when you build a life around them, when you picture every tomorrow with their face beside yours, you don't look for cracks. You don't search for warning signs. You convince yourself that everything is exactly as it should be. But looking back, I see them now. The moments, the little shifts, the things that didn't make sense but that I brushed aside because I loved him too much to believe anything was wrong. It started small, so small I barely noticed. A missed call. A text left unanswered for hours. He had always been attentive, always the first to reply, always eager to talk, always making time, no matter how busy he was. But then, gradually, that changed. I'm sorry, babe. Crazy day at work. Fell asleep early. Didn't see your message. Just a lot on my mind. At first, I didn't question it. Everyone gets busy. Everyone has moments when they need space. But then it became a pattern. Nights where he'd cancel our dinner plans last minute. Days where his replies were short, distant, like he was forcing himself to respond rather than actually wanting to talk. And then, the way he started looking at me, or more accurately, the way he stopped looking at me. There was a time when his gaze held warmth, when I could feel his love even in silence. A look across the room was enough to make my heart race. But now? Now, there were moments where I'd catch him staring off, lost in thought, even when I was right beside him. Hey, I whispered one evening, nudging him lightly as we sat together on the couch. Where'd you go? He blinked, forcing a small smile. Nowhere. But I knew that wasn't true. He was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. And then came the late nights. He had never been the type to stay out much. We loved our quiet evenings together, our little routines. But suddenly, work kept him out later and later. Another office dinner, he'd say. Just drinks with the guys. Don't wait up for me, okay? At first, I trusted him. Of course I did. But then I started noticing little things. The way he smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. The way his phone was suddenly always face down. The way he'd flinch if I reached for it. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and once it was there, it grew. One night, about a month before the wedding, I asked him if he was happy. We were lying in bed, my head resting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Of course, he murmured. His fingers traced lazy circles on my back, but there was something off about the way he said it. I propped myself up on my elbow, looking at him. Then why do I feel like you're pulling away? His body tensed, just for a second. I'm not, he said quickly, too quickly. I searched his face, hoping to find reassurance in his eyes, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. Babe, it's just stress, he added. Work, the wedding, everything, it's a lot. I wanted to believe him, so I did. I forced myself to smile, resting my head against his chest again. I just don't want to lose you, I whispered. His arms tightened around me. You won't. But now I wonder. Did he already know, even then? Did he already plan to leave? 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard him on the phone. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just passing by the bedroom when I heard his voice, low and tense. I can't do this. My stomach twisted. Who was he talking to, and what couldn't he do? I lingered, pressing myself against the wall. I know, he sighed. I know, but... Look, I just need time. Silence. Then, a heavy exhale. I love her. Relief flooded through me. He was talking about me. He loved me. And yet, something about his tone felt wrong. The weight of his words, the hesitation between them. I should have walked in. I should have asked him what was going on. But instead, I walked away. I didn't want to know the answer. A few days later, I caught him staring at his phone, his expression unreadable. Who's that? I asked casually, sitting beside him. He locked the screen immediately. No one, he said. My heart skipped. You seemed deep in thought. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it. The night before the wedding, I had a nightmare. I dreamed I was at the altar, standing in my dress, the guests all watching. But he never arrived. I called his name, searched for him, ran through empty hallways, but he was nowhere to be found. Then, suddenly, I saw him. He was walking away, his back to me, disappearing into the distance. I screamed for him, begged him not to leave, but he never turned around. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I should have known. I should have known. The car ride home was a blur. I sat in the back seat, still in my wedding dress, staring out of the window as the city lights smeared past like wet paint. My mother sat beside me, her hand on mine, but I barely felt it. I barely felt anything. The world outside moved, people walked the streets, life continued as if nothing had happened, as if my entire existence hadn't just been shattered. I felt hollow, numb. The weight of the dress pressed down on me, suffocating, heavy like a second skin I wanted to rip off. I was supposed to be celebrating right now, dancing, laughing, holding him, my husband, but I wasn't. I was sitting in the back of a silent car, in a dress that no longer meant anything, with a ring on my finger that felt like a cruel joke. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall, not yet. I just kept staring out of the window, watching the world move on, as if today was just another ordinary day, as if I hadn't just been abandoned. When we pulled up to my apartment, my mother hesitated. "Honey?" she began softly. "I need to be alone," I whispered before she could say more. Her eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure? Maybe I should stay, or—" I shook my head. "No. Please, I just need some time." She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she nodded. "Call me if you need anything. Anything." I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking against the pavement. The night air was sharp against my skin, but I barely noticed. I didn't say goodbye. I just turned and walked inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the dam broke. A strangled sob tore from my throat as I collapsed against the door, sliding down onto the floor. I ripped off my veil first, throwing it aside like it was poison. Then my earrings, my necklace, my shoes, anything that reminded me of today. My fingers trembled as I reached for the zipper of my dress, struggling with it, fighting with it, until finally it came undone. The dress pooled around me in a heap on the floor. I stepped out of it, standing there in my bare feet, feeling exposed. I stumbled to the bathroom, my breath hitching, my chest tight. I turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run. Then I scrubbed. I scrubbed my arms, my face, my neck, washing away the makeup, the perfume, the illusion of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Black mascara streaked down my cheeks, mixing with the water, with my tears. I gripped the edges of the sink, my body shaking. I looked up at the mirror, and I didn't recognize myself. My face was blotchy, my eyes swollen, my lips trembling. I looked like a ghost of the woman I had been just hours ago. A woman who believed in love. A woman who believed in him. A woman who thought today would be the start of forever. I let out a broken, bitter laugh. Forever? He hadn't even given me a goodbye. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, people trying to understand what had happened, people asking if I was okay. "Jake, where is he? Do you know anything?" My aunt. "Sweetheart, call me. Please." A bridesmaid. "Oh my God, are you okay?" I stared at the screen, watching as the notifications piled up. None of them were from him, not a single one. My fingers curled around the phone, and then I turned it off. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to forget. I walked straight to the kitchen, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I knew exactly where the bottle of whiskey was. I grabbed it with both hands, twisting off the cap with a sharp motion. The scent burned my nose, but I didn't care. I tilted my head back and drank. The liquid scorched my throat, but I welcomed the pain. I drank again, and again. I wanted to drown it. The anger, the heartbreak, the humiliation. I wanted to erase the memory of today, of the look in my mother's eyes when she realized what was happening, of the whispers, the gasps, the silence when the wedding was officially called off. I wanted to erase the way it felt, standing there, waiting, waiting, only to realize I had been left behind. My chest ached. A sob built in my throat, but I swallowed it down with another sip. I didn't want to cry anymore. I wanted to be numb. I staggered to the living room, sinking onto the couch. The bottle dangled from my fingers, half empty already. The room was too quiet, too empty. I shouldn't have been here. I should have been at my wedding. I should have been with him. Instead, I was alone. Alone in a dress that had meant nothing. Alone in a home we had planned to share. Alone with the memories of a love that had just disappeared. I took another sip, and then another, until everything blurred, until the pain dulled, until all that was left was the quiet hum of the night and the sound of my own shattered heart still trying to beat. The morning came too soon. I didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, I had been drinking, drowning, sinking. The next, I was here, crumpled on the couch, the bottle still in my limp hand, the weight of my wedding dress abandoned on the floor. My head throbbed. A deep, punishing ache pulsed at my temples, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. That pain was sharper, deeper. It sat in my ribs like broken glass, cutting with every breath. I didn't move. I didn't want to move. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes dry but burning. My body felt heavy, my limbs sluggish, as if the grief had settled into my bones overnight. The silence in the apartment was suffocating. I should have woken up beside him, in a honeymoon suite, wrapped in warmth, in love. But instead, I was here, alone, hungover, empty. For the first time in my life, I didn't want the morning to come, because the morning meant it was real, that yesterday wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from, that he was gone, that I had been left behind. The knock at the door startled me, sharp, loud, too sudden. I winced, squeezing my eyes shut. Maybe if I ignored it, whoever it was would just leave. But then, another knock, more insistent this time. I groaned, pushing myself up with trembling arms. The bottle slipped from my fingers, rolling onto the floor with a dull thud. I didn't care. The knocking continued, sending sharp spikes of pain through my already pounding skull. I clenched my jaw, stumbling toward the door, my bare feet dragging against the cold floor. "Go away," I muttered, my voice hoarse from crying, from drinking, from everything. Whoever it was ignored me. Another knock. I gritted my teeth, gripping the handle. "I said go away!" I snapped, yanking the door open. And then, I froze. The person standing there wasn't a neighbor, not a nosy relative. It was him. Not him, him. Not the man who had disappeared, but someone who had never left. "You look like hell." The voice was familiar, warm, rough around the edges, tinged with worry. I blinked, my vision still hazy. "Daniel?" He gave me a small, crooked smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, trouble," he murmured. Something in my chest cracked. Daniel had been my friend since childhood, the one person who had been there through everything. First crushes, heartbreaks, late-night phone calls filled with laughter and secrets. He had always been there, and now, here he was again. I swallowed hard, gripping the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You really think I wouldn't come?" I clenched my jaw. "I don't need anyone right now." His expression softened. "That's exactly why I'm here." I wanted to shut the door. I wanted to push him away, the way I had pushed everyone else away since last night. But I couldn't, because the moment I looked into his eyes, I saw it. The worry, the anger, the pain, for me. And just like that, the fragile dam inside me shattered. I let him in. The second the door closed, my body betrayed me. I tried, God, I tried, to act like I was okay. To pretend that I was fine, that I was strong, that I didn't feel like I was falling apart. But the moment I turned away from him, my shoulders shook. A sob ripped through me before I could stop it. And suddenly, I was crying again, harder than before. Like the floodgates had burst wide open, Like all the pain I had been holding back came crashing down at once. I felt my knees buckle, but before I could hit the floor, strong arms caught me. Daniel. He pulled me against him, holding me tight as I sobbed into his chest. I don't understand, I choked out between gasps. How could he do this? How could he just leave? Daniel didn't say anything. He just held me, letting me break, letting me pour every shattered piece of myself into him. I clutched his shirt, my fingers twisting in the fabric as if letting go would mean disappearing. I loved him, I whispered, voice cracking. I loved him so much. Daniel's arms tightened around me. I know, he murmured. I know, trouble. We stood there for what felt like hours, me crying, him holding me, the world outside moving on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had stopped. Everything except the pain. When I finally pulled away, my body felt exhausted. Daniel guided me to the couch, sitting beside me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just stayed. And for the first time since yesterday, I didn't feel completely alone. I'm sorry, I muttered, wiping at my swollen eyes. You didn't have to. Shut up, he interrupted, rolling his eyes. Of course I did. Despite everything, my lips twitched. A weak, barely there, almost smile. Daniel noticed. His expression softened. I'll stay as long as you need me to, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. I don't want to need anyone. I know. He leaned back, stretching his legs out. But too bad. You're stuck with me. I stared at him, emotions tangling in my chest. I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve him, his kindness, his patience. But right now, I needed it. I needed someone. And Daniel was that someone. From that day on, he never let me drown. Twice a week, he would show up, sometimes with food, sometimes with stupid jokes, sometimes just to sit in silence with me. And every time, I would tell him he didn't have to. And every time, he would ignore me. Slowly, the pain didn't feel so sharp. Slowly, I started breathing again. Slowly, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I would survive this. The days blurred together. Morning, night. The sun rising, the sun setting. I barely noticed. I moved through life like a ghost, drifting, hollow, untethered. Everything felt meaningless. The bed felt too big. The silence in my apartment felt too loud. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of him. His toothbrush still in the holder, his favorite mug on the shelf, the stupid, half-finished puzzle we had started on a lazy Sunday afternoon, promising to finish it together. I should have thrown it all away, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I wandered through the apartment, feeling like a stranger in my own home, my own life. I would wake up and, for one blissful second, forget. And then it would hit me. He was gone. And I was still here, alone. I used to believe I was strong, that no matter what life threw at me, I would survive. But now? Now, I wasn't so sure. How do you survive when the person you trusted most rips the ground out from under you? How do you keep moving forward when every step feels like walking through quicksand? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear down everything that reminded me of him, of us, of the lie I had been living. But I didn't. Instead, I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. I had never felt this empty before. And then, a thought. Not about him. Not about the wedding that never happened. But about Daniel. Daniel. He had been there. Always. Not just now, when I was falling apart, but before, since childhood, since before we even knew what heartbreak was. I could still remember the first time I met him, when we were just kids, how he had seen me crying over a scraped knee and without a word had plopped down beside me, offering half of his melted ice cream. Even back then, he had this way of making things feel lighter, easier, warmer. And he still did. Through everything, through the worst pain of my life, he had stayed. He never asked for anything in return, never expected me to be okay before I was ready. He just showed up, every single time. And what had I done? I had let him. I had taken his kindness, his patience, his time. But I had never thanked him. Not really. I hadn't even realized it until now. The thought sent a sharp pang of guilt through my chest. I had been so lost in my own pain that I never stopped to think about him, about how he must have felt, watching me fall apart, knowing he couldn't fix it, but refusing to leave anyway. I exhaled, rubbing my hands over my face. He deserved better than that. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to stop drowning long enough to appreciate the one person who was still standing beside me. A small idea took root in my mind. Something simple, something small. But it was something. Next time Daniel came over, I would cook for him. He had always loved my cooking, always teased me about how I made the best pasta he'd ever had. Better than your mom's? I had joked once. Let's not go that far, he had laughed. But you're definitely a close second. I smiled at the memory, a real smile. The first in a long time. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a start, a way to say thank you, a way to remind him and myself that I wasn't completely lost, that I still cared, that I was still here, and maybe, just for one evening, we could laugh again. Like we used to. Like when we were kids, before love and heartbreak had ever touched us. Like when life was still simple. And maybe, just maybe, it could be again. The night felt different before it even began. For weeks, my apartment had been nothing more than a cage, a place where grief clung to the walls, where silence weighed heavier than the air itself. But tonight, I wanted something different. I wanted to take one small step forward. So I did something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. I planned. I started by cleaning, really cleaning. Not just throwing things into drawers or pushing messes aside, but scrubbing away the dust, the old air, the reminders of a life that no longer existed. Then I cooked. Real food, not instant noodles, not whatever takeout Daniel forced me to eat when he came over. Pasta, the kind he had always loved, the one he called almost as good as my mom's, but then ate 3 servings of anyway. I set up blankets on the couch, dimmed the lights, and picked out a movie, a stupid, ridiculous, feel-good classic from our childhood, something we used to watch on repeat until we could quote every line. It felt weird to put in effort, to care about something again, but it also felt good. By the time the doorbell rang, I was already smiling. Daniel stood on the other side, dressed in his usual hoodie and jeans, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked the same as always, casual, easygoing, like he hadn't spent weeks watching me fall apart, like he hadn't been the one holding me together. "Hey," he greeted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, because that was just how we worked. But then, he froze. His eyes swept over the apartment, taking in the candles, the blankets, the table set with actual home-cooked food. The realization hit him all at once. "You did all this?" he asked, blinking. I crossed my arms, pretending I wasn't embarrassed. "You keep showing up," I said, way too casually. "Figured it's time I actually hosted properly." A slow smile tugged at his lips, the kind of real smile that made my chest ache. But before I could say anything else, his eyes widened, as if something had just clicked in his head. "Oh, hell no," he blurted suddenly, turning on his heel. And then, he bolted out the door. I stared after him, my mouth hanging open. "Daniel?" I called, stepping toward the doorway. "What the—" Gone. What? The— hell. 15 minutes passed. 15 whole minutes of me overthinking every possible scenario. Did I do something wrong? Did this mean he— The door flew open. Daniel burst back inside, breathless, holding a huge bag of snacks. I blinked. He grinned. "I knew you forgot something," he said triumphantly, pulling out a bag of our favorite childhood chips, the exact ones we used to eat during movie nights as kids. It hit me like a truck. He had remembered. That stupid little detail, that tiny part of our past that no one else would have thought twice about. But he did. A real laugh bubbled out of me before I could stop it, the kind that shook my ribs, that felt warm, that I hadn't let myself feel in too long. Daniel just beamed at me, like this was exactly what he had been waiting for. "There she is," he said softly. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was still here. The night only got better from there. We ate. We talked. We watched the dumbest movie ever made, quoting all the lines we still knew by heart. At one point, I laughed so hard I had to wipe actual tears away. We threw popcorn at each other, argued over whether the movie had aged well or not. Daniel, of course, stood by his ridiculous opinion that it was still a cinematic masterpiece. I called him an idiot. He just smirked. And for the first time in forever, the apartment felt light again. Not heavy, not suffocating, just warm. After that night, something shifted. Daniel and I had always been close. But now? Now, we were inseparable. He started coming over more often, not just twice a week, but whenever he felt like it. Sometimes we stayed in. Sometimes we went out. Walks in the park, late-night drives with loud music and bad singing. Coffee shop visits that stretched for hours because we lost track of time talking about everything and nothing. And for the first time since the wedding that never happened, I started to feel okay again. Not overnight, not all at once, but little by little, laugh by laugh, step by step. I started breathing again, and week after week, without even realizing it, I was coming back to life. Time had moved on, and somehow, so had I. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. But week by week, I found myself breathing again, living again. The days of sitting alone in my apartment, drowning in grief, had slowly faded. Instead, I went out. I met with friends. I started saying yes to invitations instead of making excuses to stay home. Laughter didn't feel foreign anymore. Smiles didn't feel forced. And of course, Daniel was always there. Still showing up, still making sure I didn't slip back into the darkness I had once been trapped in. We had fallen into this effortless rhythm, inside jokes, shared meals, spontaneous adventures that turned simple nights into unforgettable memories. I didn't know what I would have done without him. But tonight, for the first time in a while, I was alone. Daniel had texted earlier, saying he'd stop by soon. I had already set up everything: blankets, snacks, a movie queued up on the screen. It was just another ordinary night. Or at least, it should have been. The knock on the door came at exactly the time Daniel was supposed to arrive. I smiled to myself, already imagining some stupid joke he would say as soon as I opened it. I pulled the door open without thinking, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't Daniel. It was him, my ex, the man who had left me on my wedding day. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating, that my mind was playing some cruel trick on me. But he was real, and he looked like hell. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his face pale and sunken in, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. I took a step back on instinct, my stomach twisting violently. "What the hell are you doing here?" I breathed, my fingers tightening on the edge of the door. His eyes were frantic, desperate, wild. His voice cracked. I had nowhere else to go. I clenched my jaw, rage surging up inside me. "You had an entire world to run to," I spat. "You proved that when you disappeared." His face crumpled. It wasn't like that." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Really?" Because from where I'm standing, it was exactly like that. "I made a mistake," he choked out. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do, and I just—" He raked a shaky hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "I lost everything," he whispered. I swallowed, my body rigid. And then, his eyes met mine. "Please," he begged. Just let me in. Just talk to me." And suddenly, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't shattered. I was furious. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You want to talk?" I hissed. "Then answer me one thing. Why? Why did you do it?" His lips parted, but no words came out. "Why did you leave me standing there?" My voice rose. "Why did you block me? Why did you vanish off the face of the earth like I never existed?" His face twisted in pain. I was stupid." I let out a bitter laugh. "You were a coward," I corrected. He flinched. I took another step back. Whatever you need, whatever you think I can do for you, I won't. I am not your safety net. I am not your second choice. I owe you nothing. I moved to slam the door shut, but before I could, a new voice cut through the tension. What the hell is going on here? My breath hitched. Daniel. He had just arrived, standing at the bottom of the stairs leading up to my apartment. His entire demeanor changed the moment he saw my ex. In an instant, he was moving, fast, closing the distance between us in a few strides. My ex took a step back, instantly tense. Daniel didn't even look at me. His entire focus was locked onto the man who had left me broken. You have 5 seconds to explain why the hell you're here, Daniel said, his voice low, sharp, dangerous. My ex hesitated. Daniel stepped forward. 5. My ex paled. I just wanted to talk. 4. I swear, I'm not. 3. Daniel's fists clenched. His entire body was coiled with tension, his breathing slow and controlled. But his eyes? His eyes burned. He had spent months watching me piece myself back together. He had held me while I cried, sat with me through my worst nights. And now, the man who had caused it all was standing here, looking for a way back in. Daniel wasn't going to let that happen. My ex stumbled back. And then, he turned and ran. Just like before. Just like always. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The street was quiet. The night air was cool. I let out a shaky breath, my hands still trembling. And then, I felt Daniel's hand on mine. Soft, steady, warm. I looked up at him. Are you okay? He asked gently. And suddenly, every emotion rushed to the surface. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. My voice broke. I don't know. Daniel's expression softened. Without a word, he pulled me into his arms. I didn't fight it. I just closed my eyes, letting myself feel safe again. And for the first time since that horrible day, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was stronger, and I was not alone. The days after my ex's sudden reappearance felt surreal. I expected him to come back, to call, to try again, but he didn't. Maybe he finally understood that whatever we had was gone, that I had moved on, that I was never going to let him break me again. But it wasn't just that moment that had changed something inside me. It was Daniel, the way he had stood up for me, the way he had been there, not just that night, but for every step of my healing, every moment of my pain. And now, I was happy. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And Daniel was still right there beside me. We had fallen into our usual rhythm, except now, something felt different. It was in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the way his fingers lingered for just a second longer when he handed me something, the way he made excuses to touch me, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, resting a hand on my shoulder, teasingly bumping his knee against mine when we sat too close on the couch. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it, and deep down, I knew. I had always known. One night, we were walking by the river. It had become a new tradition, late-night walks, just the two of us, away from the noise of the world. The city lights shimmered on the water. The air was crisp, cool, perfect. And for the first time in months, my heart wasn't aching. I was at peace. I looked up at Daniel, at the man who had been by my side through everything, and I felt this sudden, overwhelming warmth in my chest. He noticed me staring, smirked. What? I shook my head, smiling. Nothing. But he didn't look away. His smirk faded, and something softer, something deeper, settled in his expression. I felt my breath hitch. Something was happening. I could feel it. And then, he stopped walking. I turned to him, my brows furrowing. Daniel? He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I can't. He broke off, looking frustrated with himself. I can't keep pretending. My heart pounded. Pretending what? His eyes met mine, raw and achingly honest. That I don't love you. The words hit me like a tidal wave. I froze. He kept going. I've loved you since we were kids. he murmured, his voice rough, unsteady. "Since the first time I saw you cry over a scraped knee and thought you were the toughest person I'd ever met." I let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. He smiled softly, shaking his head. "I've loved you through every stupid fight, every late-night conversation, every dumb movie night." My chest tightened. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely there. But he wasn't finished. "I wanted to tell you so many times," he admitted, stepping closer. "But you were always in love with someone else." His words sent a pang through my heart, because he was right. I had spent so much of my life chasing love, waiting for some grand romantic gesture, and all this time, the one person who had truly loved me had been standing right in front of me. And now I finally saw it. Saw him. Saw us. A tremor ran through me. I reached up, hesitating for just a second before touching his cheek. His breath hitched, his eyes fluttering shut for the briefest moment. I smiled. "You really are an idiot, you know that?" His eyes flicked open. "Why?" "Because you thought I didn't love you back." His entire body tensed. I exhaled softly, letting my hand slide down to his chest, feeling the way his heart was pounding beneath my fingertips. And then I kissed him. It was slow, hesitant at first, like the both of us were still processing what was happening. But then he pulled me closer, deepening it, pouring everything into it. The years of friendship, the years of longing, the undeniable truth that we had always been meant to find our way to this moment. When we finally pulled apart, I let out a soft laugh, resting my forehead against his. "So," I murmured, "what now?" Daniel grinned, brushing his nose against mine. "Now?" he smirked. "Now we do what we've always done." I arched a brow. "And that is?" "Whatever the hell we want." I laughed, and for the first time in my life, I knew. I was exactly where I was meant to be.